The purpose of this presentation is to provide you with an introduction and overview of service improvement in healthcare. We'll consider some of the approaches and discuss some of the tools that support improvement work, and I'll also introduce three areas where you'll be able to get useful information and resources to help you. To start with, I'd like to separate out three areas that are often discussed at the same time. The first one looks at the whole systems approaches. What does that mean? Then we've got quality approaches, and then finally quality improvement tools. Often the language gets used interchangeably, and I'd just like to present them as three different areas. I believe if we separate these three areas out, it helps us to focus on what's important to the kind of project you want to do. So, approaches, or whole system approaches, described by the NHS Institute for Innovation and Improvement and Manchester Business School. It is on the screen, and they describe it as something at the highest level, or a methodological roadmap, as they describe. And it might apply to a whole system, it might apply across different organisations. I think it's also interesting that they conclude that some people may regard these approaches as merely fads or as labels, which I think really speaks to the fact that they sit at such a high level of abstraction, they don't resonate practically with frontline services. On the screen are perhaps some of the more known areas of quality improvement approaches, and these include both whole system approaches and quality improvement approaches. Business process re-engineering was developed during the 90s and is often developed by senior leaders who look at the whole organisation and focus on processes of developing the product, as is often the case, around the processes rather than specialist functions. They argue that it requires radical rethinking and not just small-scale incremental improvement, but this whole redesign of those processes. There is a body of evidence around this improvement tool, including within the NHS, and although there's an inherent contradiction between the espoused revolutionary approach, this whole-scale organisation change, which generally speaking is top-down, is in contradiction with often the need to understand the context and the ground-up, the bottom-up approach to delivering change. So this is a very high-level, often top-down driven approach to redesigning systems and processes. Total quality management has been defined in many different ways, but one thing is consistent is that it sits as an overarching approach defining the way in which improvement is delivered. It has been described as a management philosophy and business strategy rather than just a specific improvement tool. For me, total quality management is perhaps best considered as a way of thinking about the organisation. People such as Don Berwick from the Institute of Healthcare Improvement in the US has spoken about it. The principles include thinking about quality as an effect caused by the processes within an organisation. But the principle that's important here is that they argue that whilst the processes and organisation are complex, are all understandable. And that understanding of process can help us to improve quality. And quality is often considered, or in terms of organisational success, to mean meeting customer needs, and that might include internal customers as well as external. And finally, there are two positive approaches that total quality management assumes: that people who engage in work are intrinsically motivated to try hard and do well, and the second point is that they argue that simple statistical methods, collecting of data, is important and powerful in terms of identifying the problems with processes. So total quality management really is that overarching approach to how organisations operate. And for me, within healthcare, I would have some concerns about such a reductive approach to improvement, one that just sees the organisation as a series of processes that can be tweaked. That's not to recognise the value in the approach, but it is, I think, not necessarily entirely consistent with the complexity that you work in every day. Let's take a look at some of the quality improvement approaches. All of this detail can be found in Quality Improvement, Theory and Practice in Healthcare, written by Bowden, Harvey, Moxham and Proudlove. I've referred to this several times, and I'll make sure the reference and link is in the useful information on the Prezi site for you to be able to find. This might be useful for when you are looking at your presentation or assignment. In very brief summary, Lean as an improvement tool is about removing waste. The Plan, Do, Study, Act is about following your idea, a hunch that something might work. Six Sigma is about removing difference and variation in a process. Statistical process control is about reporting on variation. Theory of constraints looks at finding where there is weakness in any particular process. Experience-based co-design is about involving the patient, the carer in the design of new processes. And the 1,000 Lives Improving Quality Together is a structured approach for improvement developed here within Wales. That's a very, very brief overview of the improvement approaches. To consider these in a little bit more detail, let's start with Lean. So as I say, this is focusing on and about removing waste. The term and the approach was developed initially within Japan, and in particular in the manufacturing field, and Toyota being the main organisation that it was focused on. There are 5 principles of Lean identified. The first is to identify customer value, what's important to that customer. Second is managing the value stream, so that's the process through which the customer or patient in this case may follow. The flow production is the third aspect, so how does the patient move through that process? The fourth principle is around pulling work through the process, so that's guiding the patient in this case or customer through the process that you would like them to follow. And the fifth and final principle is pursuing perfection, so through reducing all forms of waste in any system. Those are the 5 principles that underpin Lean. So it's about identifying what's important, removing anything that doesn't add value to the process, and helping the person through that system. And ultimately that removes the waste and makes it the most effective and efficient process. PDSA, or Plan, Do, Study, Act, also and previously referred to as Plan, Do, Check, Act, is a fairly straightforward system used within improvement work. PDSA is often used as a problem-solving tool and also a continuous improvement approach, meaning it's less about creating a large-scale single transformation, but rather about taking small steps to make improvements to an individual process. PDSA has been adopted by both UK and US health systems and adapted into what's often referred to as the improvement model. And the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle is preceded by 3 questions. So what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want to see out of this? How will you know that the change is an improvement? So what are you going to measure? And what changes can we make that will result in improvement? So understanding what you might focus on. Then you plan to make a change, you do it, you study the results, and you act. You make a decision as a result of what you find, and then you move on, you do it again until you see the outcomes that you want to see. Six Sigma, a focus on reducing variation. The Six Sigma is around creating a stable system that delivers the same outcome time after time after time. Developed in manufacturing organisations such as Motorola and General Electric, you can perhaps understand in that repetitive process sense why understanding and designing a system that delivers the same quality outcome every time is important. Six Sigma uses a structured methodology. One example of that is called DMAIC, D-M-A-I-C, which stands for Define, Measure, Analyse, Improve and Control. These are the 5 steps used to implement Six Sigma. Have a look in the text to see a much more detailed overview of this particular approach. It's worth noting that frequently both Lean and Six Sigma, or Lean Six Sigma, are used at the same time. So this is around removing unnecessary steps in a process, as well as focusing on removing the variations, so removing the different outcomes of each process. Statistical process control is a specific tool often used to support the implementation of Six Sigma. So statistical process control, the roots of this approach can be traced back to the 20s, which identified the difference between natural variation in measures of process and those that could be controlled, or referred to as special variation. This, for me, has been a really interesting tool within the context of healthcare. So let me explain. A common cause of variation might well be the demand or referrals into a particular outpatient department. So the number of people needing to see a particular doctor will naturally vary from one day to another, from 1 week to another. That would be a common cause variation, and there's probably very little we can do to influence that. But when the consultant or the department is on holiday, that creates then a delay in the patient seeing the doctor, and that might well be considered a special variation. So that is something that we can control. So in terms of this example, if we were measuring through statistical process control the waiting time for the patient to see the doctor, we may accept the common variation that sometimes we'll wait longer because more people are being referred in than other days. That is a common variable. But what we'll then see is a significant increase in waiting time when the doctor is on annual leave, and that is a special variation, and that's what we would look to focus on, how we can control and smooth out the impact of when the doctor is on holiday. Theory of constraints is the basic concept of it is that every system has at least one constraint. That is something that limits the system from achieving higher performance in terms of its goal. Experience-based co-design really is about capturing the experiences of patients and carers and understanding how their experience can impact on the way services are developed and delivered in order to improve the way that they function. The 1,000 Lives Improving Quality Together, developed here in Wales, I'll cover in a bit more detail in a slide shortly. So the final third level are quality improvement tools, and for me this is the important bit. These are the range of different techniques that you can use to understand, define, help you build solutions to the problems or opportunities that you have. Many of these tools will be a part of the approaches that we've discussed. So for example, lean methodologies will use a range of tools such as the 5 Whys tool. They may use Six Sigma will use statistical process control, and so on. So the tools are not different from the approaches, they are supporting each other. But given and when you have limited and lack of time, I would suggest that you start with the tools to help you identify how you're going to take your project forward. The website that is the information from that is on the screen is from will be provided in the resources information, and there are around 94 different tools that the NHS Improvement website provides you with access to and an overview of. And also it organises it in a way that lets you explore it, maybe given the area that you're interested in or the phase of the project that you're at. So it helps you to find the tools that are most appropriate for you. One observation I would make is that these tools, generally speaking, are described of or used within a hospital setting. That's not to say that these tools cannot and can't be used in other settings. It's just acknowledging that maybe with some frustration that the tools don't take account often of other settings such as community settings, different primary care settings such as dentistry, GP and so on. But all of them are applicable across a range of settings. Finally, I'm just going to give you an overview of 3 documents that I think provide useful information if you are interested in service improvement. The first document is the Health Foundation's Quality Improvement Made Simple, which I've spoken about before. Again, this isn't a how-to guide, it doesn't tell you what to do, but it certainly gives you more information about the different approaches that we've spoken about already in this presentation. And it also helps to focus from the Health Foundation's experience of what they argue as important, and that includes data and measurement being one of the key components that they want to focus on to support service improvement. But also, perhaps rather than some of the specific tools like Lean that we've spoken about, it also requires us to consider the involvement of staff and, importantly, the involvement of patients and carers. Next is the NHS for Improvement overview, which was authored by Ruth Bowden, Harvey Moxham and Proudlove, and provides you with an overview of, again, a bit more detail about each of the approaches, but also will make some reference to the tools. It's not a how-to guide, but again, there are some, although they are now 10 years old, but it does give you some examples, real examples in the NHS of where these tools have been applied, which might be helpful to you. And finally, it's the website that I've just referred to, which I will share the link in the resources after this presentation. And now this is the how-to guide, and as I've said, it shows you each of the tools and shows you how those can be applied, and also then illustrates with some examples as well. So that for me is a really useful resource to help you with quality improvement. So that's a very brief and very quick introduction to the field of service improvement, and hopefully provides you with more resources if you want to explore any aspect of it. Thank you for listening. As you might be beginning to recognise, I'm going to try and make this a little bit more complicated than it already is, I'm afraid. And that in particular is where leadership comes in and is so important. So despite all of the information I've just explained to you and shown you and you can access about improvement, the authors that I've referred to conclude that the process of improvement is more important than a specific approach or method. And actually, there's a question that there isn't sufficient evidence of any one particular process being better than the other. So where leadership comes in is being able to understand what's going on in the area that you are working in, what's the specific problem that needs to be addressed, and finding the most appropriate tool that will help you to solve that problem. I would encourage you to look at both the Bowden and Harvey reference, but also the links you can see on the screen will take you to a range of case studies that will help you to understand that actually there is some really good work out there that might help to influence the projects that you want to lead. In the presentation under the 1,000 Lives section, I've included a link to an overview of the 1,000 Lives programme, which will give you a lot more detail. But in essence, the 1,000 Lives, and in particular the Improving Quality Together programme that sits underneath the 1,000 Lives programme, gives staff a set of common techniques to achieve improvement in their care. And it's been developed with an understanding and appreciation of the specific or unique challenges that NHS in Wales will experience. The approach is based on 3 levels of training, that is bronze, silver and gold. And again, interestingly for me, is that they focus improvement very much on small change that make a measurable difference, rather than these grand approaches that create some kind of, or potentially create some kind of spectacular change. So they're focusing very much on the kind of small changes that each and every one of us might be able to make. So very much informed by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement in America and Don Berwick that we will mention. Also important to the 1,000 Lives model is the role of teamwork, and in particular leadership. And one aspect that they also touch on is storytelling, which you'll have a separate presentation just to understand a little more about what this might mean in the context of leadership. What you will see from page 19 in the 1,000 Lives improvement approach is that the model is based upon the Plan, Do, Study Act model. The overarching Thousand Lives programme was set up over 11 years ago here in Wales and has seen a series of projects being developed and supporting change across the NHS in Wales. But as it's now in 2019, the organisation of Thousand Lives is now rebranding and becoming Improvement Cymru. The focus will be much broader now, including both health and social care. So I'd encourage you to look out on the website for more information as Improvement Cymru begins to develop. It will provide a source of really useful information going forward.